Hey, before we start, think about something for a second. When was the last time you heard someone say, I'm moving abroad, life is going to be so much better, so much cheaper, so much easier? Probably pretty recently. Maybe it was a YouTube video. Maybe it was a friend. Maybe it was you sitting there at 11 p.m. Googling best countries for Americans to live in while stressed about rent or just life in general. Look, I get it. The dream of packing up, starting fresh somewhere new, somewhere the dollar goes further. That dream is real. And for a lot of people, it has worked out beautifully. But here's what nobody's talking about. The world has changed. Fast. Some of the most popular destinations Americans have been flocking to. They're pushing back now. Not with signs. Not with announcements. But in ways you will absolutely feel the moment you land. The moment you try to rent an apartment. The moment you walk into a neighborhood and realize something is different here. And if you don't know what's coming, you're going to be blindsided. So today we're going through 9 countries where Americans are facing growing pushback in 2026. This is not a "the world hates Americans" video. What's happening is more complicated, more human, and way more important to understand if you're seriously thinking about living or traveling abroad. Let's get into it. Starting with number 9, Canada. Okay, so I want to start with the one that's probably going to surprise you the most, because when most Americans think about moving abroad, Canada is literally the first thing that comes to mind. Same language, familiar culture, it just feels safe, right? Like moving abroad, but not really moving abroad. And for a long time, that was completely accurate, but something has shifted. Here's what's actually going on. The housing crisis in Canada has become one of the biggest political flashpoints in the entire country. Average home prices in Vancouver and Toronto are staggering. Numbers that price out locals who have lived there their entire lives. And who gets blamed? Foreign buyers. Outside money. People coming in, driving up prices, and leaving local residents scrambling. Canada has already implemented foreign buyer bans in certain residential markets. The tone around immigration has shifted. The idea of Canada as this infinitely open, infinitely welcoming place, that's being quietly walked back in real time. And here's the subtle thing, and it doesn't feel hostile on the surface. Canadians are famously polite. But try to navigate the bureaucracy, try to buy property, try to understand your actual options as an American looking to stay long term. You'll feel the friction very quickly. The easiest country for Americans is no longer as easy as it used to be, and a lot of people are still operating on information that's 5 years old. Number 8, Japan. Coming in at number 8, and this one has been building for a while and recently hit a tipping point that the travel and expat world is still processing. Japan. Japan has always had a reputation as one of the most respectful, culturally rich places on Earth, and that reputation is earned. If you've been there, you know. The food is extraordinary. The attention to detail in everything, transportation, hospitality, even convenience stores, it's just on another level. But here's what's been happening. After the pandemic, Japan reopened and tourists came flooding back in absolutely overwhelming numbers, concentrated in places like Kyoto, Osaka, and Tokyo. And with those tourists came behavior that Japanese people found genuinely difficult to deal with. Tourists crossing private property for photos, eating and drinking where it's explicitly not allowed, being loud in spaces that have always been quiet, treating ancient cultural sites like backdrops for social media content. Japan has a very specific social contract. Rules, not just laws, but cultural rules, that everyone is expected to follow. Kyoto started putting up barriers restricting tourist access in certain neighborhoods. Some areas now charge tourist fees that locals don't pay. And I want to be honest, this isn't about Americans specifically, but if you go to Japan with that "I'll figure it out" mentality, without taking time to understand how things work, you will feel unwelcome. Not because someone confronts you. The Japanese are far too polite for that. But you will sense it. One wrong move in Japan, and you will feel it instantly. Number 7, France. Okay, look, this one has been a punchline for so long that people almost don't take it seriously anymore. But I want to take it seriously today because what's happening in France, and especially in Paris, has gotten genuinely more intense. France. Paris specifically. So look, the friction between American tourists and Parisians is basically legendary at this point. It's been joked about forever. The snooty waiter who rolls his eyes when you try to speak French. The shopkeeper who pretends not to understand English even though they absolutely do. The general sense that Parisians have a very low patience for visitors who don't make any effort to meet them where they are. And you know what? There's actually something real underneath that stereotype. Because France has a very strong, very proud cultural identity. Language is a massive part of that. The way you dress, the way you carry yourself in public, the way you interact with people in service roles, all of that carries meaning in French culture that it doesn't necessarily carry in American culture. So when you walk into a cafe in Paris and you immediately start speaking English at full volume without even attempting a bonjour, you're not just being a little rude. In the French cultural context, you're signaling something. You're saying, my convenience matters more than your culture. And Parisians, who deal with this literally millions of times a year, have run out of patience for it. But here's what's changed recently and why this made the list for 2026 specifically. The post-pandemic tourism surge hit Paris incredibly hard. The sheer volume of tourists flowing through the city has created what locals describe as a feeling of being overwhelmed in their own city. Neighborhoods that used to be genuinely Parisian are now essentially outdoor shopping malls for tourists. Locals are being priced out of central Paris. The character of the city is changing in ways that Parisians are very vocal about not liking. And that frustration, it spills over into how visitors are treated. It's not always fair, it's not always directed at the right person, but it's real, and it's there. Here's the thing about France, though. It's completely fixable on your end. Learn a few words, dress with a little intention, slow down. Don't treat every interaction like a transaction. Do that, and France is still one of the most incredible places on earth. But if you walk in, acting like the world owes you an English-speaking experience, you are going to have a very rough time. Number 6, United Arab Emirates. Alright, this one is a little different from the others on this list because the pushback here isn't about resentment or cultural fatigue, it's about something more fundamental. It's about rules. The United Arab Emirates, Dubai, Abu Dhabi. So Dubai especially has done an absolutely masterful job of marketing itself to the world as this glamorous, modern, international city, and in a lot of ways, it genuinely is. The skyline is insane, the infrastructure is world-class, the food scene, the luxury, the sheer spectacle of the place. There's nothing quite like it, and so Americans started going. And they went with the assumption that a city this modern, this international, must operate on basically the same terms as New York or London or Los Angeles. That assumption has gotten people into real trouble because here's the reality. The UAE is a Muslim-majority country governed by laws that reflect Islamic values and cultural norms. And those laws are enforced, not loosely, not, well, you're a tourist, so it doesn't really apply to you. Enforced consistently, without a lot of mercy for the I didn't know defense. Public displays of affection can result in legal consequences. Certain types of speech, and including things you might post on social media, can be criminal offenses. Alcohol is legal in licensed venues, but the rules around where and how it can be consumed are strict and specific. Dress codes in certain areas are mandatory, not just suggested. And the legal system there does not operate the way American tourists expect it to. There have been genuine cases, not urban legends, actual documented cases, of Americans and other Western tourists ending up in serious legal trouble for things they genuinely didn't realize were illegal. The pushback here isn't hostility. It's not, we don't want you. But the message is very clear. We have rules, and those rules apply to everyone, including you. This is not a place where you can figure it out as you go. It's a place where you need to do your homework before you land, or you're going to find out the hard way. Number 5, Italy. And this one hurts a little because Italy is one of those places that feels like it was practically designed for humans to enjoy. The food, the history, the beauty of it. There's a reason Italy has been one of the most visited countries on Earth for basically forever. But 2026 Italy is dealing with a problem that has been building for a decade and has now reached a point where the government and local communities are taking real action. Overtourism, Venice, Florence, the Amalfi Coast, Rome, these places are being loved to death. That sounds dramatic, but it's not an exaggeration. Venice has been so overwhelmed by day trippers that the city has had to implement entry fees just to walk into certain parts of the historic center. Florence is dealing with so many tourists that locals have been essentially pushed to the outskirts of their own city. The infrastructure of these places simply was not built for the volume of people that is now flowing through them every single day, and the Italian government has started responding. Tourist taxes are being increased, visitor limits are being implemented in sensitive areas. There have been very public, very blunt statements from Italian officials essentially saying, we are a culture, not a theme park. We need to protect what makes us who we are. For Americans, this means practically that access to some of Italy's most iconic experiences is becoming more controlled, more expensive, and more regulated. You can't just show up anymore and wander wherever you want. In some places, you literally can't. There are gates, there are fees, there are limits on how many people can enter per day. And beyond the logistics, there's a cultural dimension to this too. Italian locals, especially in the smaller cities and towns that have become trendy tourist destinations, are increasingly frustrated with being treated like props in someone's travel content, with having their neighborhoods turned into open-air museums for outsiders while they deal with rising rents and overcrowded streets. Italy is still welcoming. Deeply, genuinely welcoming in many ways. But it's welcoming on its own terms now. And if you're not prepared to engage with that, to slow down, to be thoughtful, to treat the country like it's someone's home rather than your personal vacation backdrop, you're going to find the experience a lot less warm than you were expecting. Number 4, Thailand. Okay, we're in the top 4 now, and this is where things start getting really interesting. Number 4 on the list is a place that has been sold to Americans, especially American remote workers and digital nomads, as basically paradise on earth. Warm weather, incredible food, incredibly low cost of living, beautiful beaches, friendly people, what's not to love? Thailand. And look, Thailand is beautiful. I'm not going to sit here and pretend otherwise, but the gap between what Thailand gets sold as on social media and what it actually is like to live there in 2026, that gap has gotten enormous. And a lot of Americans are landing there and experiencing a kind of culture shock that they absolutely were not prepared for. Let's start with the practical stuff. The visa situation in Thailand has historically been one of the loosest in Southeast Asia. There was this long tradition of visa runs where you just pop across the border and come back and reset your tourist status. And for years, a lot of foreigners lived in Thailand that way, essentially indefinitely. Thailand has been cracking down on that. The rules change frequently, often without a lot of advance notice, and the enforcement is increasingly strict. There have been crackdowns on foreigners working remotely without proper visas. There have been deportations. The era of just kind of floating around Thailand indefinitely without dealing with the actual bureaucracy. That era is over. Then there's the cultural dimension. The parts of Thailand that have become expat hotspots, Chiang Mai, certain neighborhoods in Bangkok, Phuket, Koh Samui, have been transformed by the influx of foreign money and foreign residents. And that transformation has not always been positive for the communities that were already there. Rents have gone up. Local businesses that serve Thai communities have been replaced by coffee shops and co-working spaces catering to foreigners. The character of neighborhoods has changed in ways that longtime residents, both Thai and the earlier expats who actually integrated into the community, find genuinely alarming. And there's a cultural tension that's harder to articulate but very real. There are parts of Thai culture around religion, around the monarchy, around social hierarchy and respect that many Western expats have not taken the time to understand. And that lack of understanding, played out publicly and repeatedly, has created real friction. Thailand is still a beautiful country, but the easy life abroad narrative that drives so many Americans there, it doesn't match the reality anymore. And the faster you accept that, the better your experience is going to be. Number 3, Portugal. All right, number 3. And this one is personal for a lot of people who have been following the expat conversation over the last few years because Portugal became the destination. Like, if you were in the digital nomad world or the early retirement world or just the I want a better quality of life somewhere in Europe world, Portugal was the answer. Lisbon, Porto, the Algarve, the weather, the culture, the food, the language that's actually accessible if you know any Spanish. And then there was the golden visa and the NHR tax regime. It felt like Portugal was actively building a welcome mat for exactly the kind of Americans who were looking to make a move. And then things changed. Faster than almost anyone expected. The Golden Visa program, that pathway that allowed wealthy foreign nationals to essentially buy residency through real estate investment, got significantly restricted and then, in many forms, essentially ended. Portugal's government looked at what was happening to the housing market, looked at the protests from Portuguese citizens who could no longer afford to live in Lisbon, and made a call. The door for that particular pathway largely closed. The NHR tax benefits, the thing that made Portugal so financially attractive for foreign retirees and remote workers, those have been reduced. The exact details are still evolving, but the era of Portugal as a tax haven for expats is essentially over, or dramatically less attractive than it was. And the housing situation in Lisbon has become genuinely critical. A city that was affordable by European standards even 5 or 6 years ago has seen rental prices increase by percentages that would be shocking in any context. And Portuguese people who earn Portuguese salaries are being priced out of their own capital city. That's not an abstract political complaint. That's a real human crisis for real families. The frustration that's emerged from that isn't irrational. When you watch your neighborhood transform around you, when you watch your rent go up by 40 or 50% in 3 years, when you watch local businesses close and be replaced by things catering to wealthier foreigners, that creates resentment, even in a country as genuinely welcoming as Portugal has always been. Portugal is still beautiful. The people are still warm. But the country has looked at what happened and made a collective decision to protect itself. The door is still open, but it is closing. And if you were planning to use Portugal as your European base on the terms that were available 2 or 3 years ago, you need to do your research again, from scratch. Number 2, Spain. And honestly, this is one of the most dramatic stories on this entire list because what's happening in Spain right now is not subtle. It is loud, it is visible, and it has made international news in a way that should be impossible to ignore. And yet so many Americans planning trips or moves to Spain seem completely unaware of it. Spain, Barcelona, Mallorca, the Canary Islands. The anti-tourism protests in Spain have been extraordinary. We're talking about thousands of people taking to the streets in Barcelona, carrying signs that literally said, "Tourists go home." We're talking about protesters in Mallorca blocking roads, disrupting tourist areas, making it very clear that they were fed up. In the Canary Islands, some of the most visited islands in the world, there were demonstrations at a scale that genuinely surprised observers who thought Spain was one of the most tourism-friendly cultures in Europe. And what are they protesting? The same story, told once again. Housing. Specifically, the explosion of short-term vacation rentals, your Airbnbs, your VRBOs, that have taken enormous amounts of housing stock out of the market for local residents and converted it into accommodation for tourists. Barcelona has one of the most severe housing affordability crises of any major European city right now. Young Spaniards who grew up in the city literally cannot afford to live there. And they look around at apartment buildings full of tourist rentals and they connect the dots. The Spanish government, particularly in regions like Catalonia and the Balearic Islands, has started taking actual regulatory action. Barcelona has announced that it will not renew tourist apartment licenses when they expire, which will effectively phase out that entire sector of the rental market in the city. Mallorca has implemented strict caps on tourist numbers in certain areas. The Canary Islands government has had public debates about what sustainable tourism even looks like going forward. Here's the thing I want you to hear clearly, because this is important. When you go to Barcelona in 2026, you are not the target of that anger specifically. You as an individual. But you are part of a system that the people who actually live there are increasingly unwilling to just quietly accept. And you will feel that in the energy on the streets, in the way some interactions go, in the political environment of the city. You're not the target, but you are part of the problem that locals are pushing back against. And the more aware of that you are, the more thoughtfully you can engage with it. Number 1, Mexico. And here we are. Number 1. And this one hits closest to home for the most Americans, and because Mexico isn't some distant destination. It's right there, accessible, affordable, and for the last several years, it has absorbed a massive wave of American expatriates, remote workers, and retirees looking for a different quality of life. Mexico City, Oaxaca, Tulum. The numbers are staggering. After the pandemic, Mexico City became arguably the single most popular destination for American remote workers in the entire world. Fast internet, incredible food, low cost of living, easy access. almost irresistible to a generation of suddenly location-independent Americans who realized they could work from literally anywhere. And what happened? What always happens when any place gets that popular that fast? Rents went up. Dramatically. In neighborhoods like Roma Norte and Condesa, rents increased by percentages that pushed local Mexican families out of places they'd lived in for generations. People who grew up on those streets, whose parents built lives there, gone. Priced out by outside money. In Tulum, a genuinely local Mexican beach town got essentially remade into an international playground that most local Mexicans can't participate in or benefit from. The cultural tension that emerged is real and growing. The conversations happening in Mexico City and Oaxaca about American gentrification are loud and public. In newspapers, neighborhood meetings, social media, even graffiti. Here's the complicated truth. Mexico's overall culture is still genuinely warm toward Americans. The hospitality is real. The welcome is real. But in the specific places where Americans have concentrated in high numbers over short periods, that warmth is being strained, visibly, undeniably. The Americans thriving in Mexico right now are the ones who show up with humility, with genuine curiosity, treating Mexico as a place with its own culture and value system, not just a cheaper version of the life they left behind. Okay, before I wrap this up, I need to give you the honest version of what all of this actually means. None of these countries are banning Americans. Let me be absolutely clear about that. You can get on a plane tomorrow and go to every single country on this list. The borders are open. The flights are running, but here's what's actually happening. The world is reacting. 2 years of over-tourism, to the distortion of local housing markets by foreign money, to the exhaustion of communities dealing with an overwhelming influx of outsiders who arrive with very little understanding of the places they're going to. And these countries are not passive about that anymore. They're changing laws, restricting access, raising prices and fees specifically designed to limit foreign visitors and residents. If you arrive anywhere on this list without knowing that context, without understanding what has happened and why people feel the way they feel, you are going to encounter friction you weren't expecting and won't know how to read. But if you show up with awareness and genuine respect, if you engage with these places like real communities full of real people, not just beautiful scenery arranged for your benefit, most of these countries are still extraordinary places to visit and live in. The era of treating anywhere in the world like your personal playground, that era is over. And honestly, it should have been over a long time ago. So that's the list. 9 countries. 9 different versions of the same underlying story. And I hope what you're taking away from this isn't fear or discouragement, because that was absolutely not the point. The point is awareness. Going in with your eyes open, with real information, with an understanding of the world as it actually is in 2026, not as it was in 2019, or as it looks in a perfectly edited YouTube video. Now, if you want to go deeper, I made a video called 7 countries where Americans are no longer welcome, and some of those places have already crossed the line from pushback into something more serious. Linked right here. If this video gave you something to think about, hit the like button and subscribe. We cover this stuff regularly, and with depth most travel channels won't touch. Drop a comment too. Are you planning to move abroad? Have you experienced any of this pushback firsthand? I read every single one. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.